Let me ask you something. Think about the last conversation you had. How did it go? Did you feel like you were really heard and truly understood? Communication is something we do all day, every day. But for something so basic, it's one of the hardest things to get right. So, why is that?
Right, let's just dive right into this. Have you ever walked away from a chat feeling, I don't know, completely invisible? I definitely have. I remember this one time I thought I was giving super clear instructions to a colleague on a project. Crystal clear. And I found out later they'd done the exact opposite of what I asked. And honestly, it wasn't their fault, and it wasn't really mine either. It was just a classic communication breakdown. So in this explainer, we're going to get into exactly why that happens and, more importantly, what we can do about it.
So, first things first, let's start with the absolute basics. At its core, communication is just this, an exchange. It's a two-way street, right? We're swapping information, ideas, feelings. It's how we connect with each other. But as you're about to see, this simple-sounding exchange is actually a minefield of potential problems.
To really get a handle on where things go wrong, we first have to understand how communication even works. And here's the key. It's not a single event. It's not like just tossing a ball to someone and you're done. No, it's a process. It's a whole journey that an idea has to take to get from one person's mind to another's. So let's actually unpack that journey.
So how does an idea actually get from my brain to yours? Well, it's kind of like a 7-step adventure. First, you've got the source. That's me, the person with an idea. Then I have to form that idea into a message. But that message needs to be put into a format, right? That's called encoding. I have to turn my thought into words or symbols. Then I pick a channel. Am I saying this to you face-to-face? Is it an email, a text? Then it gets to your end. You're the receiver, and you have to decode it. You have to interpret what my words actually mean. And then, and this is so important, we have the final step, feedback. Your response lets me know if my message actually landed the way I intended. And here's the catch. Any one of those steps can go wrong.
Now, what's really fascinating is that this entire 7-step process is wrapped up in something called context. This is the situation, the environment, the relationship you have with the other person, everything. For example, asking your boss for a raise during a formal performance review has a totally different context and a different tone than, just casually bringing it up over coffee. That context changes everything about the message. If communication were just about those 7 steps, it'd be pretty straightforward, but this is where things get really, really interesting. The real challenge, and honestly, the real magic of it all, is in all the hidden layers that live just underneath the words we actually say.
Just think about it for a second. Have you ever said the words, "I'm fine," when you were, well, anything but fine? Of course you have. We all have. The words are exactly the same, but the real message is completely different. And it all depends on our perspective, our emotions, our experiences. The words themselves, they're really just the tip of the iceberg.
And this example just illustrates the point perfectly. Listen really closely. Here's the first one. A woman without her man is nothing. Okay, now listen again with just a tiny change in punctuation. A woman without her man is nothing. Whoa. The exact same words, but a totally opposite meaning. That's the power of how we deliver things.
And this brings us to such a critical point, especially when we're talking to people in person. This old saying, it's so much more than a cliche. It is a fundamental truth, and it's actually backed by research. The signals we send without saying a word often shout way louder than anything we could ever say.
Okay, get ready for this, because this breakdown is wild. When we're talking to someone face-to-face, the actual words we use, the things we're so focused on, they only account for a tiny 7% of the message's impact. Just 7. 38% comes from our tone of voice. The pitch, the speed, the emotion behind the words. And a whopping 55%, more than half, comes from our body language. That means a mind-blowing 93% of our message is nonverbal. Isn't that incredible?
So what on earth makes up that giant 55%? Well, it's all of this. It's the little things, like a subtle arch of an eyebrow. It's the way you're standing. Are you tall and confident, or are you slouching? It's the gestures you make with your hands, whether you're making eye contact. It's even stuff you don't realize you're doing, like how fast you're breathing or if you're fidgeting. All these little signals are constantly being sent and received, and they're painting the real picture behind our words.
Okay, so we've established that communication is incredibly complex, right? But the good news is we are not helpless. There are actual concrete tools we can all use to get better at it and build much stronger connections. So let's open up the Communicator's Toolkit.
A fantastic place to start is with what's known as the 7 C's. Think of this as a checklist for making sure your message actually lands the way you want it to the first time. Is it clear, correct, complete,
concrete, concise, considerate, and courteous. So, for example, let's take concrete. Instead of just saying something vague like, hey, this report needs some work, try something concrete, like, this report is a great start, but it needs a clearer summary at the beginning and some more data in section 3 to really back up your points. See the difference? One feels like criticism, the other is actual, helpful feedback. But here's the thing. Sending a great message is only half the battle. We spend so much time worrying about what we're going to say, but we spend almost no time thinking about how we listen. And that brings us to what might just be the single most powerful and the most overlooked communication skill there is: active listening.
Scott Peck really just nailed it with this one. True listening requires your full, undivided attention. It isn't a passive activity. It's not about just being quiet and waiting for your turn to talk. It's an active choice to try and understand someone else's world.
So how do we actually do it? Well, here are 5 steps you can try in your next important conversation. First, you have to genuinely pay close attention. That means phone down, laptop closed, just focus. Second, physically demonstrate that you're listening. Lean in a little, nod your head, make eye contact. Third, check for understanding. Use little phrases like, okay, so what I'm hearing is. That makes sure you're on the same page. Fourth, and this is the hard one for a lot of us, don't interrupt. Let them get their whole thought out. And finally, when it is your turn, provide feedback that actually shows you heard what they said.
Look, getting great at communication is a lifelong journey. It's not a destination you just arrive at. But the biggest single improvement you can make on that journey doesn't start with talking. It starts with listening. So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a little challenge. Think of one important conversation you've got coming up this week. How could you approach it differently now? What could you change just by making the choice to listen with your full, complete attention?